I think people undervalue happiness today.
They undervalue happiness.
Undervalue happiness. And I say that
Talk about that.
because we're so transactional.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, go a little deeper. What do you mean by that?
Because I will forego happiness, personal passion, in the interest of something transactional that takes care of my immediate needs today, right? And you see that happen over and over and over. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is that your happiness or that personal passion really never comes to fruition because you're over here doing the transactional stuff.
Yep.
And I personally, I'm saying that out loud because it's something I'm constantly trying to manage. Yes, I have to take care of the day-to-day. I have a family, right? I have to take care of them. That's important. And so as a father, as a husband, I have to be intentional about doing those things, but I have to balance that against my personal passions.
Welcome. You are listening to Season 2 of the Bonafide Leaders Podcast, a podcast that exists to inspire legitimate and authentic leadership in the workplace and beyond, and I'm your host, Tim G. Williams. Now, here in Season 2, our theme is Making the Leap. You may call it leveling up, uncharted territory, or expanding your reach. It's those times in our life and our careers when we take on a new challenge. You'll discover how you can successfully navigate your own huge leaps as you hear stories from me and others. This season, I'm excited to be interviewing some exceptional leaders from a variety of fields who'll share some of the big leaps they've made. You'll get a glimpse into what's enabled both their professional and personal success. Now, a quick housekeeping note. If you're finding this podcast useful, remember to subscribe and be sure to leave a rating or review. Hi, and welcome in to another edition of the Bonafide Leaders Podcast, and I am your host, Tim G. Williams. Now, today we have another guest. My man, Dennis Cail, is in the building, and I'm happy to have you here, man.
Thank you so much, Tim, for having me. I was super excited about doing this today, so we're going to have fun.
We are going to have some fun. Now, look, I'm going to read your bio for the guests
Please.
Who may not know you. So, Dennis Cail is CEO and founder of Zirtue, based in Dallas, Texas, and is an accomplished entrepreneur, Navy veteran, and recognized leader in financial technology. Zirtue, a rapidly growing fintech firm, revolutionizes financial inclusion with streamlined loans and automated repayments, supported by partnerships with Morgan Stanley, Google, and others. Under Dennis's guidance, Zirtue has garnered national acclaim as a top 50 fintech company and has seen rapid month-over-month. Dennis's entrepreneurial journey spans over 20 years, marked by leadership roles at PwC, that's PricewaterhouseCoopers, and IBM, where he specialized in technology, mergers and acquisitions, and corporate development. His career began as a systems engineer in the United States Navy, leveraging top secret clearance to enhance naval communications. Dennis actively contributes to various boards, including the Dallas Regional Chamber and Goodwill Dallas, leveraging his expertise to bridge wealth gaps in underserved communities. Now, his accolades are numerous and include just a few that I'm going to name here. One is as a Forbes Next 1000 honoree, Ernst Young Entrepreneur of the Year Southwest winner, and from the Texas Business Hall of Fame, Future Legend Veteran Award.
Yes.
Dennis holds a degree from Southern Methodist University and continues to drive social impact in the financial technology sector. So again, welcome on in, Dennis. Happy to have you here.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate you.
All right, so let's get started with this. Something I've been asking every guest the last several episodes, which is, if you could have that dream interim job for a week, doing anything you want to do for 1 week, what would that be?
That's a very interesting question. Very loaded question for me, actually. Normally, that would be a safe question, right?
But I think so.
Yeah, I think so for most people. But yeah, my answer is going to be a little off character for me, a lot actually. If I could have my dream job, Tim, I would be a comedian.
A comedian?
For a week. Like, just do stand-ups nationally. Just see what happens.
Just see what happens.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, that is definitely unique. I appreciate you offering that perspective.
Yeah.
That's a dream job I would never dream about. It would only be a nightmare for me, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But good for you. I'll let you run with that.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe one day after Zirtue.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so look, today in our theme is all about navigating different leaps throughout our careers, throughout our business life. And I'm I'm excited to talk with you because when we sat down for lunch not too long ago, we had a great conversation.
Yes.
And I was like, man, this needs to be heard by more people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to maybe begin with just kind of going through briefly, right, your journey. So you started in the United States Navy.
Yeah.
And you make your way to where? And then walk us through from that point all the way to where you are now as CEO of Zirtue. Just a brief background, and then we'll go a little bit deeper.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I started my career in the Navy as a systems engineer, setting up ship-to-shore, ship-to-ship communications, working with routers, transmitters, receivers, couplers, all the stuff you like to talk about at parties. Had a top secret clearance for several years. But prior to the Navy, I actually grew up in very humble beginnings. I grew up in low-income public housing in Monroe, Louisiana. My mother was 17 years old when she had me, and my father was just recently drafted to the United States Marines as part of the Vietnam War. And so high school sweethearts, but didn't know what they were doing. Eventually figured it out much, much later in life, but had some stressful times growing up, right? And so in our community, we didn't have banks or credit unions. Grew up in the projects in Monroe, Louisiana. We had several liquor stores and pawn shops that would cash your check for 30% of whatever your check was. So even at a very young age, I knew that was bad math. And then you kind of fast forward. First time I ever got on an airplane was when I went to boot camp in San Diego in the Navy. And after boot camp, I walked outside the naval base. Very much a similar scene. A lot of payday lenders, buy here, pay here car lots, rent-to-own furniture stores. And it just kind of hit me in that moment that all these predatory lenders are targeting every demographic that I've been a part of, which is minority, low income, and military veterans. And so I'm giving you that context because that's what planted the seed for me many, many years ago, that if and when I had the time, money, resources to chip away at this issue, so that people that either come from underserved communities, or maybe they have a life event, maybe they get laid off, have a medical emergency, doesn't have to pay a 400% interest rate to a payday lender, right? So that's kind of where it started for me, at least that a desire to try to help instead of hurt. And so from there, left the Navy, undergrad in computer science, MBA in finance. First job out of undergrad was working for IBM, building e-commerce platforms, and was tapped on the shoulder by their corp dev team to say, hey, can you build us a few tools? And did that. And they came back and said, this is awesome. Why don't you come over to our team and help lead some of these mergers, integration, carve-outs that we're doing? I said, sure. Don't know.
I got to pause right there.
Yeah.
Because somebody listening is going, hold on. You were building tools. And then someone inside corporate development said, can you do a little more than building some tools for us? That seems unusual inside, maybe not of an IBM of a technology company, but
yeah,
talk some about that. I mean,
yeah. So let me take you back to the time frame too, right? Because I do think that's important for context. You bring up a good point. So this was the late 90s when IBM had coined the phrase e-commerce, which is no longer even a term. We just do it today, right? But back then it was very new and novel. So IBM would coin things before they really had mass production of something. And, my team, my job, we were building these tools, but internally you had different departments that would leverage the tech team to sort of, and in this case, our corp dev team was doing a lot of things on spreadsheets. They wanted me to build them a synergy analysis tracking tool, put that in the portal so they didn't have to manage these spreadsheets that always got out of sync and had errors and everything else. And so lots of sort of broken process things that they did that they wanted to digitize. And so because I thought that was simple, they thought I would be of value for them and their team, and they could teach me the M&A part.
Which is that's again, so this is elementary. I just think it's important as we go through this conversation because that is the way business works. Yeah. There is a need. Yes. There's someone who can fill that need. Yes. And there's a marriage.
That's it.
That takes place.
That's it. That's exactly right. And that's what happened. I knew nothing about M&A. And they said, that's okay. And by the way, IBM is one of the best places in the world to go learn something. Anything you want to do, you don't just learn it, you become an expert in it, right? So they are really known for that. And a lot of Fortune 500 companies today, those founders came from IBM
Yeah.
as a result of that early training. So I'm grateful and thankful for that, of course. So did that. And we did everything from due diligence to valuation to if and when we decided to acquire a company, because we went through a whole buy versus build process internally. And once we made the acquisition, my team would also be responsible for the integration. So I would stand up the integration management office. We would make sure all the people, tech, processes got brought over into the company, and that we started to realize some of those synergies that were told and sold to the board to make sure that the acquisition value was realized.
So I want to pause right there. Again, not everyone listening is an M&A junkie.
Sure.
Capital markets is a world that, you and I understand.
Yep.
At the same time, this is part of your leap, it's part of your journey, meaning that, you started in the public sector.
Yes.
Now you found your way into the private sector.
Yes.
You started sort of building systems, and now you're leveraging systems, technology systems, we'll call them, for the purpose of valuation and integration and acquisition and selling off of assets, what have you.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's actually a pretty significant leap in and of itself.
It is.
Seems.
It is, and it does. But I will tell you, Tim, when you're in it, you don't realize that, you don't think about it. To the extent that you just thought about it, you're just kind of going with the flow, and you're so close to it that it doesn't seem that big. It just seems like another step.
Okay.
If
All
that
right.
makes sense.
It does make sense. So before we go to the next professional leap, I want to go backwards.
Sure.
To something that you hit, and maybe there's some that's listening is like, hey, I want to hear more about your personal story, because I think that's impactful for obviously where you are today, like we've talked about before with respect to Zirtue. But let me ask you, before becoming a professional or being a part of the Navy, was there anything about your background that sort of prepared you to take what I would call big leaps, big bold steps of faith?
Yeah, I would say starting from nothing, you have nowhere to go but up, and I think because I was a big dreamer early on, and I was raised by amazing women, strong women, my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and just the value system that they gave me, first and foremost, the fear of God, the love and respect for your family, to try to be helpful to people versus try to help other people. So even though we didn't have much, I spent a lot of time running around the projects, helping older people who couldn't do for themselves, because my grandmother at the time would make me, right? And it wasn't until about a year, initially I would complain about it like most kids, like, why am I going? I'd rather go play. And then, but once I started to see the impact that it had on their lives, then it made sense to me. It started to click. And so, I think having that sort of servant mindset is important. And we try to teach it to our kids. I know you guys try to teach it to your kids. And so that to me makes a big difference, because if you're going through this world and you're just trying to figure out how to serve yourself, there's only so far you're going to get, because I think for the most part, people pick up on that. But what I've been really humbled by and surprised by is how many people care about Zirtue's mission and are looking for ways to try to be helpful for us the way that we're trying to be helpful to other people as well. So I think it's counterintuitive, right? Because we live in a capitalist world, and I'm a capitalist, you're a capitalist. And so those two things can coexist. And so for me, it was always about being helpful, being innovative. I think I've always thought outside the box and had crazy ideas. And as many crazy ideas as I had, I don't remember a time when my mother, grandmother, or great-grandmother ever said, that's crazy. They always said, baby, you can go do this. Go do it, right? And they would smile, and they gave me the confidence to do that, gave me the confidence to dream in color, right? Because these were things I never saw. Didn't exist, right? No one that looked like me was doing it, but they gave me permission to dream in color. And I think that continues to serve me well today.
It's awesome. A couple themes so far as you've navigated your life, right? You were raised in an environment that encouraged and supported you to be helpful and not hurtful.
Yep.
Second is that you were a natural dreamer. And people didn't, or at least the people closest to you, didn't try to shut those dreams down.
No.
They enabled you to think big, think wide, expand your mind, your thinking. which undoubtedly has helped you believe, right, that
Yeah.
you can go accomplish amazing things, which certainly you've done. thus
Yeah.
far.
Yeah. Well, I'll even go a little bit deeper than that, Tim, because you have your family, sort of support system, which is important, regardless of what class or ecosystem you grow up in. I grew up in a house where there's a lot of love, right? And that's important, okay? But I grew up in a community that was rough by anyone's account, right? Because, I mean, my neighborhood was a pipeline to prison or to the graveyard, right? For a lot of people, including my classmates, who were much smarter than me, but may not have had the family structure or encouragement. And I say that because there were even drug dealers in my neighborhood where I would try to go hang out with my other friends who were hanging out with them. And I'd go over to their house and they would kick me out and tell me to get out.
You're not supposed to be here.
And for a while it kind of hurt my feelings. I was like, why are you letting my classmates hang out over here, but you're kicking me out?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I realized and they told me, look, you're getting straight A's in school, you're doing good, go do good, go do this, go do something different, right?
Yeah.
And so even within that negative environment, you have people that are looking out for you if and when they see something different. So I think that's important to call out.
I think so as well. Yeah, you grew up in Monroe, and I grew up outside New Orleans.
Yeah.
For the first all the way through most of elementary school.
Yep.
And the environment that you and I grew up in was similar.
It's rough.
In that people encouraged me not to go to school. In fact, carrying my books around, I remember very distinctly walking from class to class throughout the school. If you had a backpack or you had books, people try to knock them out your hands.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Or they tease you, right?
Absolutely.
They talk about you like nerd,
Absolutely.
All right.
So you're right. Having a family that's supportive with a whole lot of love, that's important.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about your first leap and we could go into more detail, but we won't for now because there's a lot to get to.
Sure.
From the Navy to the IBM, and now you're actually doing M&A deals, corporate development. You're working with the integration office. There's another move coming after IBM. What comes next?
Entrepreneurship. That comes next for me because after 30, 40 different deals on both buy side, sell side at IBM, I felt like I knew enough about M&A to start my own boutique M&A advisory firm. And that's what I did. And, went out and acquired a few clients. Phillips Oil and Gas in Bartlesville, Oklahoma was my first client. I don't even know if most people even know where Bartlesville is, but just outside of Tulsa. And really the biggest and only thing in Bartlesville is Phillips. And you have a Walmart and all that. But that was my first client. And then we just I would hire people that I knew from my prior life that were super smart, capable. I knew how much money they were making, so I could make them an offer that they couldn't refuse. So, because I knew they had families as well. And so having that inside knowledge and having customers with these long-term projects and assignments just made sense for me. It made sense for them. And as I mentioned to them, look, if this doesn't work, you can always go back into corporate America. So I wasn't selling a bill of goods. I was selling on a contract that we need to go implement and deploy, right? And these were 12-month plus with the option to extend. And then from there, while that was going on, I would deploy people on those projects and go look for the next assignment to make sure we all kept eating.
You go hunt. They go execute.
That's right.
Yeah, that was the model.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's some entrepreneurs listening.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some solopreneurs. They are running this thing by themselves. So for you, you made a decision at some point that you wanted to expand, that you needed to bring people on, that you wanted to bring people on, that you wanted to be big or what have you. Talk about that mental process of working through hiring the first person, whether to hire, how to expand.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because I will back up a second. I left out a key detail because entrepreneurship is not always intentional. So at IBM, I was a guy responsible for invoicing the clients and all that. And so I would see what everyone's bill rate was, especially mine. And I knew I was getting paid a fraction of that, right? So this is important because after a while, I said, well, you know what? What if I did this on my own and just build myself out at this rate? And so when I got my first client at Phillips Oil and Gas, it was really a contract assignment for me personally, right? And it was a 6-month assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And I left IBM for a 6-month assignment. And within 3 months, Phillips was asking me, do you know anyone else like you
Okay.
who can help us with XYZ?
Okay.
And then my company was born.
So let me ask you, when you decide to leave IBM for the 6-month opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
in your mind, were you thinking, I have an option A to go back if
Mhm.
things don't work out?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that was
Absolutely.
always in the back of your mind.
I could do that today.
All right.
Right. I mean, if Zirtue doesn't work out or something goes terribly wrong,
Yes.
right? I personally believe you can always go back into corporate America.
Okay. So was your plan, though,
Mhm.
plan A, I should say, was to keep it going? Meaning you were going to do 6 months and expect that it would keep going from there?
I was going to do 6 months there and find another contract.
Okay.
That was my plan, just for me personally, right?
Gotcha.
I wasn't thinking even I was going to start a business. I was just saying, hey, let me go get this $250 an hour versus $50 an hour.
I'm with you.
Right?
And
That's the only math I did.
yes. And isn't it amazing how things come together?
Yeah.
So Phillips, your customer, your client, they ask you,
Mhm.
are there any more guys like you
Yeah,
out
that's
there?
right.
And
That's
that's
right.
how the business expands.
That's exactly how it started, really,
Mhm.
because I was essentially, 1099 for myself, and then I had to create a company to start hiring people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
We'll talk some about this, but
Mhm.
this is a good point to maybe discuss hiring.
Yeah.
So one of the leaps that we all have to make is
Mhm.
determining who we're going to hire, fire,
mhm,
put on the side for a little bit.
mhm,
What's your process as you think about whether it was Uptown Financial, which is what we're
mhm.
talking about
Yep,
now,
Yep.
or fast forward right to the days now at Zirtue, the early time periods?
hmm
What's been your kind of calculus for making hires?
Experience. That's the big thing for me, because I knew my clients. We'll go back to Uptown Financial Group when I left IBM.
Yeah.
And got the name because I was living in Uptown, literally. It's nothing special about that.
That's nice.
But I always knew, based on the people I was dealing with, mostly C-suite and certainly senior leadership and above, that when these people were working with us, they were making bets on us, right? Which means that they were putting their jobs on the line. So that was never lost on me, because I've been on both sides of the table.
Right.
So I think it's super helpful to understand what keeps your customers, your partners up at night. And so you can give them some level of confidence that you're not going to have any impact negatively on their livelihoods,
Yeah,
right?
or you're going to minimize the risk of negative outcomes, right?
That's
you
it.
can't completely close the
You
door on
can't,
all of it.
you can't, but you're going to be the one right there working with them on that. And I think what I've always tried to do with my old company and with Zirtue is try to be the best partner, right? So I give you that because it helps me back into your people question. In order for me to be the best partner for X company or X partner, that means I need a certain caliber of people, right? And it's that old adage, I forget who said it, but if you think it's expensive to hire an expert, wait until you hire an amateur, right? And so that
Yeah.
continues to play out and be true, whether it's with Zirtue or whether it's with my old company or any company for that matter. So I'd rather pay an experienced person more than hire 4 or 5 inexperienced people,
Right.
because the results you get from that are exponential.
Another way to say that, some would think of it as the penny wise, pound foolish.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Oh, something I used to say to my kids is, don't be majoring in minors. Right?
Oh, I love that.
Major in a major.
Love that. Love that. One of the things I tell other entrepreneurs that I mentor, to your point, is it's really important for you as a leader to be able to look around corners, but never cut corners. And if they don't remember anything else I said, if they remember that, it will at least be some sort of governing, guiding principle they can go focus on and hopefully build something special.
There's something close to what you just referenced. Dabo Swinney, head coach at Clemson University, was on a podcast, and he was referencing a time period when he was talking with some guys who were GAs, graduate assistants, right?
Okay.
College football teams across the country, and they were at some conference.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're a graduate assistant, you see a head coach as that's where I'm trying to get
That's
to.
the goal. Yeah. Yeah.
And so they asked him,
No
hey,
pun intended. But
exactly.
Yeah.
So the question was from the graduate assistants to Dabo Swinney was, hey, how can I get to where you are? And of course, when he told them, they kept wanting to know, yeah, but how do I get there faster? Or how do, and so what you're describing and what Davos Swinney said is, look, you're trying to get to the 25th floor.
Yeah.
You got to go through
all the other floors.
All the other floors.
No shortcuts on that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So I try to be mindful of those things today, because even as leaders, man, we have a tendency, and you know this, you coach a lot of leaders and executives, we have a tendency to forget the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Because we're so close to something, we're so deep in it, and it's important for us to remember the things that we know.
Yes. We know, but we forget, we put to the side,
Yeah.
and we don't remind ourselves as frequently as perhaps we
That's
need
right.
to. Yeah.
That's right.
All right, I want to ask you about, before we go to Zirtue, I want to ask you about advisors.
Mhm.
You mentor people,
Yep.
and I'm curious, as you were going through these phases of your life, whether it be from the Navy to college and, beyond, moving, right, San Diego, Dallas, all these things, did you have advisors in your life, and what were those folks encouraging you or discouraging you to do as you were navigating these leaps?
Always. I mean, my first advisor was my mother, right? And then my grandparents, and then I had people in my neighborhood. But every step along the way, I've always tried to be a good listener, because what I found is when you listen to people as they're trying to give you advice, they're always willing to try to give you more advice, or at least when they see you haven't really executed on something that they advise you to do, they're more willing to come back and say, hey, remember that thing I told you, instead of just giving up on you, right? And so that's been helpful for me. Even in the Navy, I had a lot of mentors in the Navy that gave me all sorts of advice in terms of what I should do, what I shouldn't do. The thing about advice, though, is you have to, bump that up against your personal passion. And other people can see your God-given gifts and talents. Sometimes those are fairly apparent. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes a lot of people have these hidden talents, right? But what they couldn't see was my hidden passion, right? And so passion is typically something, either you're doing it or living it, or you have to communicate it, right? And so for me, I got a lot of great advice at Navy, IBM, outside of those organizations, through different nonprofits. I've had mentors. If my old mentor, Randy Walker at IBM, would have had it his way, I would have been a lifetime IBMer, and he was certainly being very intentional about trying to make that happen for me. So there's just no doubt that I would be somewhere in the C-suite now at IBM if I would have stayed there, but it wasn't my personal passion, right? And so I think you have to make your own choices, live with those choices, right, wrong, or indifferent, and figure out what you're going to be happy doing. And I think people undervalue happiness today.
They undervalue
happiness. And I say that because we're so transactional.
Okay.
Okay.
Go a little deeper. What do you mean
because
by that?
I will forego happiness, personal passion, in the interest of something that's transactional, that takes care of my immediate needs today, right? And you see that happen over and over and over. And what ends up happening is that your happiness or that personal passion really never comes to fruition, because you're over here doing the transactional stuff.
Yep.
And I personally, I'm saying that out loud because it's something I'm constantly trying to manage. Yes, I have to take care of the day-to-day. I have a family, right? I have to take care of them. That's important. And so as a father, as a husband, I have to be intentional about doing those things, but I have to balance that against my personal passions as well.
And maybe it's not a but. Maybe it's a and.
I don't think so. I don't think, but I think most people feel like it's a but, or it's a if, or it's a when something else happens. It's more, if I'm putting on my coding hat, it's more of a if then statement, in the coding logic language.
Well, let's stay there for a minute. It's what you're describing is not necessarily binary. It's not binary as zeros and ones.
That's right.
Right. There's whole lot of gray. It's analog.
Right. That's right. It's more analog. Yes. And so I try to be mindful of that. I try to teach my kids that, right? Because we live in a world where if you're really passionate about something, you're really intentional, and you put the work in, right, you can be very successful.
And sometimes success is delayed success.
Sure.
Sometimes
Sure.
gratification is delayed gratification.
Yeah.
And in a world where we've got microwave, pause, record live TV, right? DM, everything is instant.
Yes.
It can sometimes be frustrating to have to wait.
It
What you're
is.
describing, though, is that there's a fulfillment. I'm going to switch the word happy and almost tweak it to say there's a fulfillment that's a little bit more long lasting when you pursue something that's a personal passion as opposed to today's transaction. Hey, listeners, if you're busy, and I know you are, but you want to grow your leadership in an efficient and cost-effective way, I invite you to check out my on-demand digital leadership courses at bonafideleaders.com/courses. Now, you're wondering, what do I get in exchange for my purchase? Well, you'll get dynamic teaching and insights, and you'll leave with the tools and practical application you need to be a more effective and impactful leader. Wherever you lead, at work or at home, you'll become more confident in your capabilities because you'll know your unique leadership style and how to apply it. You will know how to create powerful and engaging meetings and also how to better integrate your work and life. You'll get that and much, much more. Now, if that weren't enough, with your purchase, as my gift to you, you'll also be added to the Digital Bonafide Leaders community, a real community of leaders like you for networking, best practice sharing, and you'll have direct access to me. Go to the website and you'll find a link in the show notes, and you'll get instant access today.
Yeah, well, I'll give you two examples that are relevant to your question, Tim, which is if my mother had it her way, I would have, my mom eventually got a job, worked at the post office, stayed there for 30 years and retired. If she had it her way, straight out of high school, I would have went to work at the post office, stayed there for 20 years and retired. When I told my mother I was going to the Navy and I'm going to go to school and do this, that, she was upset because she felt like I was making a bad choice, right? And so that's fine because that's what she knew as security back then. I just didn't see that as being my life.
I'm trying to imagine that right now.
Right. See me at a post office for 20 years.
I want to see you in a uniform and everything right now.
Right. But, you fast forward, same thing in the Navy. I had a commanding officer and other senior leadership within the Navy say, hey, you should stay in the Navy for 20 years. You do this and here's your path. And couldn't see myself being in the Navy longer than the 4 years that I signed up for, right? But they had this vision for me and my career that I didn't see. And I say all that to say this was not bad advice. It just wasn't the best advice for me.
That's really well said.
That's all.
Yeah, not bad advice.
No.
Just wasn't the best for you.
No, and I think entrepreneurs, people that are working for a company, whatever you're doing, you have to be mindful of what is it that you want. And I go back to people forego happiness now because I think it's less about what people want personally now and more about them just taking care of the day-to-day because that's such a stressful thing, right? And I get that.
You brought back a very vivid memory for me of living in the Bay Area.
Yep.
And I just wrote about this in my newsletter, the sticker shock. And you've been to Bay Area so many times, right? I mean,
I still get sticker shock when I go there.
Capital. And I mean, the value of our home, I'm going to show you when we're done.
Yeah.
It's incredible, the appreciation. And one of the things that we heard over and over when we lived there is that people are just trying to get by.
Yes.
Many people, right? There's many that live off Sand Hill Road or conduct business over there. You know what I'm talking about.
That's right.
Menlo Park and other parts
I know
of the
who
Bay
those
Area.
folks are. Yep.
But for the large majority of other people who may not be in tech, who just work in a regular job or what have you, or may not be senior in tech or may not have hit it big yet, man, you're just trying to get by, which of course drives a transaction-oriented approach.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so I respect that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about this next leap. You're at Uptown, and then somehow you make your way to PwC. So what happened with that situation?
Yeah, so PwC, what I did was I exited Uptown, and PwC said, hey, why don't you come over and help lead our M&A practice? And so did that for 3.5 years, and it was great. It was different from my business, which started out, as I mentioned, as a lifestyle business for me personally, and then it sort of morphed into what it became, still boutique, but just a small number of heavy hitters. And we did global deals at Uptown Financial Group, and we would partner with companies like PwC, IBM, and others. And how it all happens, just to go back to answer your question, is we didn't want to do the SAP implementation or the Oracle implementations or the Lawson or PeopleSoft, whatever back-end ERP system they were on. We didn't want to do that work. We wanted to run the deal itself and stay truly boutique. So we would partner with other firms that were larger, had the resources and everything else to support it.
Yeah, they run that leg of the race. You run the transactional
That's right.
side.
That's right. And holistically, we had a fully integrated, comprehensive plan for any carve-out, integration, whatever it is. And it just allowed us to come to the table with our partners with a full solution, because what you don't do in-house, and we do this today at Zirtue, there are things we do in-house and there are other things that we partner on, right? Because no one could do it all. So,
well, you could. You might go bankrupt or broke doing it.
Yeah, and so we always try to, and I try to do this today at Zirtue. We try to focus on our core in terms of what we do really, really well and what our mission is, and those are the things that we don't outsource. But everything else is a candidate for outsourcing. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it, but it becomes a candidate for outsourcing. But great time at PwC, more capital market stuff, cross-border M&A, all that fun stuff. But I was super passionate about launching, didn't have a name for it yet, but launching Zirtue, right, to do something in this space.
Yeah, and again, this goes back to payday loans, people being taken advantage of. So there's going to be some who got the bio brief on Zirtue.
Yeah.
Can you talk about this period of time? I guess it's 2018, 2019, when you're thinking about launching this thing. Just give the listener a sense of, first of all, what you do.
Sure.
And then we'll go deeper from there.
Yeah, so two things. At our core, out of the box, Zirtue simplifies loans between friends and family, and we automate the repayment process to take the awkwardness out of it. So Tim doesn't have to chase his brother, cousin, friend around for the money. If I'm borrowing money from Tim, I am required to link my bank account and my debit card to my Zirtue profile, and I'm agreeing based on the terms I've set with you, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, or a year, I'll pay you back over a year, that I'm agreeing that Zirtue is going to draft my account each month.
So it's going to happen.
It's going to happen,
yep.
Which is vastly different than what you get from a Zelle or Venmo, where you can send someone money and hope and pray you get it back.
Yeah,
With Zirtue, there is a digital promissory note. We keep a digital paper trail, how much is owed, how much has been paid. We also give you, the family member or friend, the option to forgive that loan, right? Because think of everything you do offline, we've digitized it, because sometimes people do have medical emergencies, or maybe they get laid off, right? We give you the option and the power to forgive that loan. We zero out the balance, confetti everywhere, everyone feels good. But what we do that's really unique, and this kind of goes back to how I even came up with the idea for Zirtue in the first place. I came up with the idea for Zirtue 10, 15 years ago, because literally 10, 15 years ago.
Okay.
Because I keep all my notes in my phone and other places. Like, there's so many other things that I have about 100 different companies and ideas.
Well,
that
you're
are
a
this
dreamer.
Phone.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it goes back to that dreamer's mindset.
Right.
Now, obviously, I can only focus on one thing at a time. But it wasn't until after PwC that I was sat around thinking, okay, now which company do I want to start? Zirtue was at that sort of top 3, but it was because my sister and other family members would borrow money from me, and I had limited success in getting that money back. But also I would have to just really gift it to them or forgive it. But the biggest issue I had, and this is where Zirtue's business model comes in, the real issue I had was not knowing that the money was being used for the intended purpose.
Right.
So that's what caused me to say no to family members more time than I said yes.
Right. Let's talk about that for a minute. So my cousin says he needs some money because, he's not going to get paid until the 15th. And between now and the 14th, he's got to get some new tires. But turns out you send that money and Next thing you know, they show up and they have some Jordans
There
or
you go. That happens. That happens.
something else that's not tires.
Yes.
So that's the motivation.
Yes.
And then when was it approximately when you actually said, I'm going to start this? Was that 2018, 2019?
That was 18 when
18.
I said I'm going to start it.
Okay.
It wasn't until 19 when we actually started it.
So let's talk about that too,
Yeah.
because that's where some of the folks listening are.
Yeah.
They're somewhere between idea, conception,
Yeah.
right? Innovation, idea, concept, right? To actual implementation. I'm actually going to go and write the charter and the business plan. I'm actually going to go and talk to a bank about whatever, get capital. What was that process for you as you work towards, man, I got this set of ideas. Zirtue is in the top few 3.
Sure.
But then there's this other process where I'm going to have to probably get some capital or invest my own to go make this a reality. What made the difference for you?
It was just research too. I think any business, any founder of any company, you have to do your diligence on the front end. You have to answer every potential question that an investor or customer or partner would ask you, right? And so it started with the data. We started looking at the data. I looked and there's some data put out by the Federal Reserve Bank every year where they sort of guesstimate how much in terms of volume friends and family in America lend and borrow with each other. And so if you we looked at their latest data set, and according to the Federal Reserve Bank, Americans lend and borrow over $200 billion a year with each other.
So
annually, right? So right away, big market.
Yeah.
And it told us Zirtue's not a platform trying to convince people they should be lending and borrowing money with each other. They're already doing that, right? But it also said friends and family are one of the biggest banks in the world, right? And so if we can put some infrastructure around this to formalize these loans and make sure that lenders that are lending money to friends and family can see within the app that the money's going to go straight toward the intended purpose.
Yeah.
We think there's an opportunity here. And so I sat down with my co-founder, Michael C., who's been a good friend for years, and he and I always threatened to do something together, but he's a hardcore finance guy, right? So I spent several years on Wall Street and ran a hedge fund here in Dallas for several years. They had about $500 million under management. So I'm the tech guy. He's sort of that finance and compliance piece of it. This is a fintech company. And I give you that context because it's important to understand where your blind spots are, right? And figure out how to solve for those before you go charging down the road. So we did that.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. So you get the company off the ground. You've got some decisions to make. And I want to talk a little bit about now the business side of Leaps, which is expansion.
Yeah.
So you start, I'm going to call it small because we all start someplace. I don't know if anybody starts big. Maybe somebody does. But I'm going to assume you start whatever small is. We're not going to define it. And then at some point you get bigger. Can you talk about that period of time, those early years? What did expansion look like, especially in the middle of coronavirus?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Which I would imagine would have maybe helped your business, hurt? I don't know. You talk about that. What was that like in terms of the expansion process?
Yeah, so I think first thing you as a startup, you're so focused on just getting the company up and running, getting your first tranche of users and partners and someone who's willing to pay you for your product, right? So that was a focus. But as a fintech, we had to worry about other things. So we couldn't just build a product and just get it out to market. We had a engineering track doing all the building of the product, but we also had a compliance track running in parallel because we had to get our bank compliance, regulatory house in order, because all transactions on Zirtue run on our bank sponsors' rails. Okay, so we partner with different banks around the country to process debit cards, ACH payments. Those are the rails that we run on. So if we're going to be moving money, we have to be compliant. So we have a strong, I'll throw out some acronyms and get some definitions, but we have a strong BSA AML compliance program, which is run by a chief compliance officer. So it's Bank Security Act, AML, anti-money laundering. And we have a strong KYC, know your customer program that our bank sponsors require us to have. Because what we don't want is someone on the Zirtue app pretending to be Tim asking Tim's friend for money
Right.
and committing fraud,
Right.
right? We're obsessed about protecting the integrity of the platform because as a fintech, if people can't trust you to move their money, then you're really not in business,
You have
right?
a fundamental problem.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So our bank partners are sensitive to that. We're oversensitive to it. So we spend a lot of time and money on regulatory and legal, a lot of money and a lot of time. And I will say that to say fintechs are hard to start, and you have to spend just as much time and money keeping those companies going and growing. Back to your growth question, you don't get to growth unless you check some really big boxes in fintech, which I would say that's partially why you can probably count on one or two hands the number of Black entrepreneurs that are running fintech companies, right? It's a hard business. It requires you to really get familiar with the lay of the land from a compliance standpoint. And you always have to be proactive about it because the last thing you want is any regulator to have the perception that you're trying to hide the ball, right?
Sure.
So we're overly aggressive when it comes to that piece. So I give you that context because there's a separate piece.
Yeah.
And I think this is important for every industry, every company. You have to know what your nuances are. And that's a big one for us at Zirtue.
Yeah. We talk about building walls of defense sometimes, right? We talk about companies. We talk about the hurdle rates. We talk about boundaries to getting going, getting started. And for this business, a fintech company, compliance, as it makes complete sense, and trust.
Massive hurdle.
Yeah. This is huge.
Massive. And by the way, those laws change every quarter.
Is that right?
Yeah, just about. There's something new coming down the pipe,
Wow.
but certainly it changes every year.
Wow.
And whatever, so we're SOC 2, Type 2 compliant, for example. All those certifications have to be renewed every year. You have to go through different audits and things like that. That requires some heavy lifting on our part and some dedication of resources, time, and money to make all that happen. So that's just to stay in business. This is not, okay, this is going to help us grow. This is just to stay in business.
We haven't even got to expansion
Right.
yet. That's the point.
That's right.
So I had a great business professor, actually at SMU. He's the guy who co-founded hotels.com. I don't know if you know this guy, David.
I don't know him personally.
So he started a company, and the name of the class was called Conservative Entrepreneurship.
Okay.
And it was one of the best classes I had
Okay.
during my graduate experience. And one of the things that he would often say to entrepreneurs who want to build a business or entrepreneurs inside of a corporate structure is whenever you've got an idea, go ahead and double the cost and half the revenue as a basic rule of thumb. And this was 20 years ago when
Good
he was
rule.
right.
Good rule.
So I'm curious for you, to what extent did you forecast accurately the expense or burden side of this thing relative to the growth and expansion side?
It's that saying, projections are wrong all the time.
Yes.
But some of them are useful, right? And so we had our projections. They were wrong, all right? I would say that your professor's data is a little outdated, probably
This was 20 years ago.
20 years ago. It's more quadruple that now. Whatever your estimates are,
Sure.
quadruple it. Slice it into 4.
Because I want to call it the variances are just wider
They are.
in today's world, right?
They are. The variances are wider and the hurdles are higher.
Yeah. Particularly after 2008, 2009, I would imagine as well.
Much, much higher.
Yeah.
And the markets are more saturated depending on what space and place you're going into as well. So you have to account for that, right? And I say that because you think about, I'll take a simple business. If I wanted to start a product business today, my cost of acquiring customers is at least 10x of what it used to be 10, 20 years ago, right? I can't even buy an ad on a word on Google now I paid a fraction of what people are paying today 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
Okay. So the cost of everything is higher. So you can't sort of look at or make these assumptions that investors can't get behind. Because they see more companies than any of us see.
Absolutely.
Right. So,
Yeah.
So I think it's important for entrepreneurs to be real with themselves, be honest with themselves, and not overshoot the revenue targets and not undershoot the cost.
Yeah. All right. Good talk. This is good words of wisdom for the aspiring entrepreneurs out there. All right. I want to switch back to mistakes, regrets, something we have not talked about. With the benefit of hindsight, maturity, as you think about the different ways you've navigated leaps, relationships, what, if anything, would you go back and do differently as you navigated leap 1, leap 2, leap 3?
I would spend more time thinking about partnerships as it relates to our business, because early on, kind of alluded to this, we were thinking, let's just go ahead and build a holistic product that can do everything, right? We burned through a lot of capital doing that versus thinking about the right partnerships that could support our mission and our scale, okay? And I think as an entrepreneur, when you're taking on investors especially, you feel like you have something to prove to yourself, to your investors.
Sure.
I mean,
That's
really, it's
human,
like,
right?
Right. This is what we do. And I'll be honest, I've made the mistake of sort of letting ego, get in the way of saying, okay, what's the right thing, the sort of practical thing to do here? I don't have to prove everything to everyone, right? But as entrepreneurs, you have a tendency to get a little bit too caught up in that versus taking a step back and even taking some more time, which is what entrepreneurs don't really do. And I'm guilty of this. I have a huge bias toward action. So for me, time is like the enemy, right? And so I'd rather be moving. Early on, it felt like I would rather be moving in the wrong direction than not moving at all. And in hindsight, it's just best to just sit back. You don't have to be in a rush to execute or spend money if you're not 100%, right? Sure, and I would say 90%.
Right.
Let's give it 10% difference, but at least put the work in that's required for you to have a good picture, the whole picture, all the information you need to make a more informed decision. Because I've made a lot of decisions with limited information, which is a superpower for entrepreneurs.
And it's a requirement.
It's a requirement.
To some extent, right? For every leader, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think we have to start giving ourselves permission to pause and think and rethink and get more data points.
Yeah.
And now I think we live in a world where the data is more plentiful.
Yes.
So there's no excuses now. So, yeah.
Fair point. There's lots of data. Insights sometimes are still hard to come by at times.
Well, that's where advisors come in. I still lean on my board. I lean on advisors. I have trusted advisors and my go-to folks that if I'm thinking about something or I'm struggling with something, I still have a nice group of folks in my support system and my ecosystem that I lean on, including you, right? So for me, it's important to have good thought partners around you that can be a good sounding board, because otherwise you can go down a hallway and think it's the right thing to do and it's wrong. And just to put a pin in the question you asked around mistakes, I have been strategically right and tactically wrong more than once. And that has cost me and the company time and money that we've recovered from. But you think about it, okay, was that necessary?
It's good.
Probably not.
I appreciate you sharing that. Somebody out there is listening and they would say, a guy like Dennis with all of his accolades, man, he probably doesn't make mistakes. He's just clean as a whistle.
No.
Turns out we do make mistakes, me included. And that's just part of living. It's part of learning.
Well, you think about it, right? You think about, let's use sports. Athletes make mistakes all the time on the field, right? Or on the court. Most fans never know what those mistakes are. They know.
That's right.
But most of us watching, we don't even know there's a mistake being made, other than the obvious, missing a shot, fumbling the ball, whatever. It has to be overly obvious, but they know, right? The coaches know, the players know. It's the same thing for a company, right? And I say that to say we all make plenty of mistakes, but the goal is to make sure you don't make mistakes that you can't recover from. That's one. But two, make sure you get those mistakes solved for before your customers or your fans or anyone else realizes there was a mistake made.
Yeah, that's the idea. All right, we're gonna end it here. I want to ask you about stress and what do you do to kind of de-stress, given that you got some big responsibilities with family, with the business. You're dealing with good sized money. You got teams of people, partners, right? Investors. What do you do to kind of manage it all, de-stress, take the load off?
Exercise. I walk a lot. I spend a lot of time try to spend as much time as I can with my kids, go to the games, because anything that sort of takes my mind out of the work and the day-to-day is a healthy thing. Church is a big thing for us. Spending time with family and friends, I do as much of that as I can on the weekends and the holidays, because there's a chance where, there's no talk about work. We're just being who we are, and we're just enjoying each other. And I do think it's important for entrepreneurs to have outlets, because we don't give ourselves outlets the way we should. I don't, and I have to be intentional about de-stressing, because there's no world where I don't have stress. It's just a stress management. Every day is a stress management exercise for me.
So let me ask you, maybe a question I wasn't thinking about until you just said that.
Mm-hmm.
Scale of 1 to 10. How strong or how good at you right now in this season of managing your stress level? 10 being, I'm outstanding, bro. I'm taking all these walks. 1 being
5.
Come on.
5.
You can't give the cop out 5. Come on
5.
now.
All right, I'll say 6.
Okay.
I'll say 6, just to
Get off the middle.
Yeah, just to get off the middle, because it's hard. It's easier said than done, and I won't sit here and pretend to anyone who may see this or hear this that I have that figured out.
Yeah.
I don't. And that's still a work in progress for me.
Let me tell you something, Dennis. When you have it completely figured out, let a brother know.
I will.
Look, this has been awesome.
Yeah.
Appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thank you, brother.
And I think it's going to help some people, especially the entrepreneurs, the leaders out there. Thank you for sharing with us all the leaps you've made and the successes and the challenges. This was a good time well spent.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate you.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. If you got value from this podcast, don't keep it a secret. Subscribe, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone you know. Until next time, remember, our world is starving for bona fide leaders. Take your leadership to the next level by applying at least one thing you heard today.